He had been walking home from his late shift at the grocery store, dragging his worn-out shoes along the cracked sidewalks, when he first noticed her. The winter wind cut through the thin fabric of his jacket, but he barely registered the cold. His mind was consumed with bills, overdue rent notices, and the gnawing worry of whether he'd have enough to eat for the next few days. Yet, amid all this chaos, there she was, a frail, elderly woman, shivering slightly on a bench near the corner of the street. Her thin coat was frayed at the edges, her hair disheveled, and her hands trembled as she clutched a small, tattered handbag to her chest. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure if he should approach. Life had taught him that some encounters could bring trouble, but then he noticed the fear in her eyes, the way she glanced around as if lost, confused, and alone. Something inside him stirred, an instinct he didn't even know he had. He shook his head, telling himself he had no time for charity, but the pull was stronger than his excuses. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gently, approaching her. "Are you okay?" The woman looked up at him, startled, as if she hadn't realized anyone was there. Her lips quivered, forming words that were barely audible. I'm trying to get home." He nodded. "Okay, let's sit here for a moment. Can you tell me where you live?" She shook her head, her eyes glistening with tears. I can't remember." He frowned, his heart tightening. He had seen a lot in his life, but seeing someone so vulnerable and alone, especially an elderly person, tugged at a part of him that rarely surfaced. "Don't worry," he said, settling himself on the bench next to her. "We'll figure it out. Here, have some water." He handed her the small bottle he had in his backpack. She accepted it with shaking hands, sipping slowly. "Thank you, young man," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know why someone would help me." He smiled softly, though his own stomach was growling from hunger. "Sometimes, people just help because it's the right thing to do," he replied. It wasn't a lie, he truly believed it, but he didn't mention the countless times he had wished someone had done the same for him in his darker moments. Hours passed, or maybe just minutes, he couldn't tell. The wind had turned sharper, and the city's sounds blurred into a dull roar around them. Still, he stayed by her side, talking to her gently, asking about her family, listening to her fragmented stories about her life. Each word painted a picture of a woman who had once lived fully but was now teetering on the edge of being forgotten. She smiled faintly when he joked lightly, the first real smile he had seen on her face since discovering her on that bench. Eventually, he offered to help her up. "I'll take you somewhere warm," he said. "We can figure out the rest later." She hesitated, then nodded. With some effort, he supported her as they slowly made their way down the street. Neighbors passed by, some offering glances of curiosity, others shaking their heads in quiet judgment. But he ignored them all. The thought of leaving her there alone was unbearable. They reached a small diner that stayed open late, the kind of place with yellowed lights and the comforting smell of fried food. He helped her into a booth and ordered 2 cups of tea with whatever snacks he could afford. As they sat together, she finally relaxed, letting out a long, shaky sigh. "You are very kind," she murmured, her eyes watering. He waved his hand dismissively, but inside, he felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years. "I don't have much," he admitted, "but what I do have, I'm happy to share." For the first time in a long while, the city didn't feel cold or harsh. Sitting there, across from this frail woman who had nowhere else to go, he felt a strange sense of purpose. He didn't know it yet, but this encounter, born out of a simple act of compassion, was the beginning of something that would change his life forever. Over the next few days, his life transformed in ways he hadn't anticipated. The elderly woman, who had no home to go to, or at least none she could remember, stayed with him in his small apartment. It wasn't much, a single room, peeling paint on the walls, a threadbare rug, and a bed that had seen better years. But it was warm, and it was safe. He made space for her on the couch, insisting that she rest while he cooked the little meals he could afford. Each morning, he would wake early, working his usual long hours, but he never left without checking that she had eaten something and that she felt comfortable. She had taken to calling him, "my helper," a phrase that warmed him more than any praise could. And in return, he learned to appreciate her quiet presence, the way she hummed old songs under her breath, the careful way she arranged the few personal items she had brought, and the subtle smiles she gave him when he managed to make her laugh. It wasn't always easy. She had moments of confusion, wandering the apartment as if searching for something, or someone, she couldn't remember. He would gently guide her back, holding her hands with a care that surprised even him. He washed her clothes, helped her bathe, and tended to small injuries she'd acquire from stumbling. Neighbors whispered at first, curious about the man caring for a woman who wasn't related to him, but he ignored them. Their judgment didn't matter, the woman's safety did. During the evenings, they would sit together, and she would tell him fragments of her life. Stories of a family long gone, of a son who had traveled far and succeeded in ways she never fully explained. She spoke with pride, though her details were often scattered, and he listened intently, piecing together her memories like a puzzle. At first, he thought she was just an elderly woman who had lost her way, someone whose past had faded into obscurity. He didn't realize the significance of the life she had lived, or the man who would soon enter his world because of it. Despite his exhaustion from juggling work and caring for her, he found a strange sense of fulfillment. He would bring home small treats, sometimes a loaf of bread, sometimes a packet of noodles, just to see her eyes light up. She noticed everything, the little gestures that most people overlooked, and she would clasp his hands, whispering heartfelt thanks. It was a quiet connection, built on compassion and trust, one that transcended words. He began to notice subtle changes in himself, too. He slept a little better, feeling needed in a way he hadn't before. The daily grind, the constant struggle to keep food on the table, seemed lighter because he had someone to care for, someone whose trust and gratitude reminded him that his life had meaning beyond survival. One night, as he tucked her in, she reached for his hand. "You're very kind," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You don't even know who I am, and yet, you treat me as if I were your own family." He smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "I don't need to know everything about you to know that you deserve care," he replied. "Everyone deserves that." Her eyes glimmered in the dim light, and for a moment, she looked at him not as a stranger, but as someone who had entered her life when she needed help most. "I don't know how to repay you," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said, shaking his head. "Just be safe, and that's enough." The bond between them grew quietly, almost imperceptibly, until it became a comforting rhythm in their lives. He realized that in caring for her, he had found a purpose beyond the struggles that had once defined him. And though he had no idea who she truly was, or the wealth and power that lay in her family, he knew this: he would never abandon her, not now, not ever. Little did he know, the life he was building with her in that tiny apartment was about to collide with a world far beyond his imagination, a world of influence, wealth, and power that would turn his simple acts of kindness into a bridge toward a destiny he had never dreamed possible. It was a quiet afternoon when everything changed. He had just returned from work, tired and stiff from standing for hours, when he noticed the sleek, black car parked outside his modest apartment building. At first, he thought it might be someone lost, another neighbor perhaps, but the vehicle seemed out of place, almost glaring against the faded bricks and cracked pavement. Curiosity tugged at him, but he didn't have time to dwell. He helped the elderly woman into her chair by the window, offering her a cup of tea as he wiped his hands on his worn-out apron. Suddenly, the door burst open. A sharply dressed man, tall and commanding, rushed inside. His presence filled the small apartment with an energy that was almost overwhelming. "Mother," he called out, his voice a mixture of relief and panic. "Are you okay? Where have you been?" The elderly woman's eyes widened, and she stood slowly, unsteady on her feet. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her voice carried a hint of embarrassment. She gestured toward him, the young man who had become her caretaker over the past few days. This is the one who helped me." The man's gaze fell on him, and for a moment, the room went silent. The young man's heart raced. He had expected questions, perhaps suspicion, but nothing like this. The man's eyes were sharp, calculating, yet there was an unmistakable flash of surprise, even awe. "You cared for her?" he asked, his tone a mixture of incredulity and curiosity. I just helped," he stammered, unsure how to respond. "She was alone, and I couldn't just leave her outside." The elderly woman smiled faintly, gripping his hand gently. "He didn't hesitate," she said softly. "He looked after me when I had nowhere else to go." The man's expression softened as he stepped closer, studying him with an intensity that was both intimidating and respectful. He exuded power and confidence, the kind that came not from arrogance but from someone who had mastered every aspect of his life. And yet, here he was, standing before a young man who had little and yet offered the kind of generosity that money could never buy. "I'm sorry," the man finally said, his voice quieter now. I didn't realize, he paused, as if the weight of understanding had just hit him. I didn't realize that someone like you, someone struggling, would show my mother such kindness without expecting anything in return. The young man swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the magnitude of the moment. He had never thought his small actions, helping someone in need, offering food, warmth, and care, would matter beyond the confines of his tiny apartment. And yet, here was a man, a stranger to him, who carried with him power, influence, and wealth that could change his life forever. The elderly woman stepped forward, holding her son's hand. This young man saved me when I had no one else, she said. He didn't care about who I am or what my family has. He cared about me. The man looked back at him, and for the first time, he saw not just a caretaker, but a person of integrity, courage, and compassion. You have no idea how rare that is, he said quietly. Then, with a slight smile, he extended his hand. I'm grateful to you, more than you can imagine. My mother, my family, we will never forget this. The young man hesitated, then shook his hand, feeling the weight of the connection being forged in that moment. It wasn't about money or status, it was about recognition, respect, and the acknowledgement that simple human kindness could ripple outward and touch lives in ways that were unimaginable. As the afternoon light spilled through the window, he realized that his life had changed irrevocably. What had started as an ordinary act of compassion had led to an extraordinary encounter. The man in front of him was no ordinary visitor, he was a powerful CEO, someone whose decisions affected thousands of lives. And yet, all that power did not intimidate him, instead, it highlighted the value of the young man's actions. For the first time in years, he felt hope, not the fragile, fleeting hope he had clung to in his struggles, but a deep, solid hope rooted in the realization that goodness mattered, that kindness had the power to transform lives. As the CEO and his mother exchanged words of gratitude and reassurance, the young man understood something profound. Sometimes, the smallest gestures, the decision to help someone when no one else will, can change your destiny forever. And in that small apartment, amid teacups and worn furniture, a bond had formed that neither wealth nor circumstance could break. His life, once defined by struggle and scarcity, now held the possibility of new beginnings, guided by the simple but powerful truth that compassion matters above all.